Hi, nobody. I know that the light is a bit weird, but right now I'm in the kitchen, so adapt. We have to adapt. Now, um, today's video is about how we are not avant-garde, most of us. Whatever type of art, especially concerning music, that's where I'm going to be approaching it. Most music that's experimental, progressive, most of it is not avant-garde anymore. And why is that? Avant-garde comes from French, obviously, and it basically is a military term that means the people who are in the vanguard. Also, obviously, but if you don't know what that means, basically it's the people who are in the front. And I have to, well, open, be the first in line to basically get killed most of the time. Why is this relevant? Well, when the term avant-garde started to be used in art, it was to refer to some types of art that were breaking what had been done for the past centuries, and they were just taking it all, throwing it away. Let's do something new, completely. That's not entirely a new concept either. So far, most art had been following a kind of a progressive growth and evolution, going, and in the case of Europe, in the culture that has shaped us, we would consider it from medieval times to the mid to late 19th century. We have the early medieval art. I don't know if in English it's also Romantic, but that's what we call it here. Then would be the second part of the medieval era, which would include Gothic art. Then comes the Renaissance, Baroque. There's a bit of overlapping with Classicism, because Rococo is at the end of Baroque and kind of touches with Classicism, and some elements are kept. And Classicism, and finally Romanticism, that lasts for most of the 19th century, and it's probably the most well-known thing from there. During that time, we see a kind of an evolution in the way that art is created. We can see that visually, but also musically, and that's where I'm going to go, because while I have studied art history, I'm not that familiar with it, and it would also take too long, and I'm already taking extremely long. So during medieval times, and actually for most of that, for most of the various eras that I have described, there's two basic arts in terms of music. Would be the elite one, that originally started with the church and then kind of evolved into other things, and then there's the popular art. This is still a thing that's considered nowadays, but now that the line is really blurred. At that time it was extremely differentiated. There were elements of crossover, it's always there, but the audiences were really different, and the creators were extremely different. In early medieval times, music was essentially in the elites, church music, Gregorian specifically, and it was an early stage of Gregorian chanting, where basically everybody sang exactly the same note, which is called monody, I think, in English. No distinctions were made between voices. It was simply the text sung with really long notes and no jumps per se. All the melodic lines are always kind of soft in a way, in that they are not abrupt. They are always building or declining by simply going up or down the scale, maybe with a tiny little leap, but never anything too big. It's music for the context of the church. It was made for that, and it was extremely simple. Going forward, it's not exactly defined when one thing stops and the other one starts, but polyphony starts to become a thing even in Gregorian. First with similar melodies that either go opposite ways or follow one another, and then just various voices. I'm oversimplifying it. It would be even longer. Now, where does that leave us? With a somewhat understanding of proper harmony. It's not melodies anymore. It's single melodies. It's a harmonic piece. It's harmonic pieces. Now, from there we go to the Renaissance. In the Renaissance there was a bit of a cultural revolution that includes arts. The idea was to return back to the aesthetic ideas of the Greeks and the Romans. I might talk about my opinions on that later, but for now we will just keep it objective. So the idea is that beauty is simplicity, or the other way around. Beauty is ordered, it's clean. There are no imperfections, no disproportions, everything is kind of a square, And music kind of reflects that. And also music starts to become a separate entity from the church in the elites section. It starts being both the church and nobility. And from there we have music that's really well structured, follows that structure with without going out of that way, of that path at all, by any means. It's really simple music, but it kind of works, because it was designed to be that way, and it's always that way. And after that whole thing, we got the Baroque, where everything becomes complicated, everything becomes ostentatious, a way to show ostentation. a lot of details to make something more full. There's the horror vacui concept in art, and it applies to the music definitely. Religious music keeps kind of being in the same path. It doesn't really change that much throughout most of history. It does evolve, but it's slower, a lot slower. But composers start to make things fuller, more. They start to have an appreciation for really technical things, and it becomes really showy. It's like shred, but way back when. Classicism returns back to the same ideas that the Renaissance had, but with the advanced theory and knowledge that came from Baroque. So it's returning to the same ideas, but with the influence of Baroque. And finally, we have Romanticism that attempts to break with what was established in music and kind of go for a purely expressive art, and that makes it makes composers not follow necessarily the specific ideas that were conceived previously. They started not following structures or the same structures. They make new structures. They start to add a lot of instruments. The symphonic orchestra kind of comes from that era. Everything becomes quite chaotic sometimes. If you listen to Berlioz or Wagner and Mussorgsky, they start making quite complex music in a harmonic level, and also in terms of technicality. It's technicality to express something. It becomes hard to play, really hard. But then enter the late 19th century, and especially the first half of the 20th century, and it all goes, we had kind of a progression like this. We return a little bit, we go back again, we go to to Romanticism. It seems like things have evolved a lot, and then we have that, just jumps, and it goes apeshit. Suddenly there's hundreds of movements at the same time. Structure and sound as it was conceived kind of gets not forgotten, not put to the side, but obliterated completely. The first half of the 20th century in terms of music is absolute destruction, especially after the First World War, where the sensibilities of the artists were challenged in a way that kind of had not been conceived previously. They started to deconstruct and reconstruct music, and also technological experimentation came around really hard from that point, and that also made a lot of things easier. And we have things like electroacoustic music, electronic music. First section of electronic music started around the really late 40s and the early 50s. We have at the very start and at the 1910s, we have noise become something. with Russolo, that made machines that simply made noises, industrial noises and city noises, because he considered that that was the music of the man of the future, because people were starting to live in cities and not on towns and near the fields, and people were starting to become industrialized. So he took it upon himself, he was a poet by the way, not a musician, to make the music of the future, and he did that. Now, throughout the whole 20th century, almost every style of music that wasn't there before and that is still here now, almost everything was created during that time. From metal to electronic music, from hip hop to emo, punk, and a lot of experimental music. All of that happened during that century, most of it during the second part of that century, and we have arrived at an age where everything has been done. Almost nothing can be new anymore. And people who like to try to make new things are mostly, for the most part, destined to fail. And when you have done something for one album, it's already been done. So making a second album of that means that you're repeating yourself. The idea of avant-garde and to go forward starts and ends when you make something new for the first time, and then you are done. There's nothing else. And while that is depressing in a way, I see it mostly because to this day we still consider a lot of things that have been there for almost a century, some of them less, but throughout the 20th century still now are considered avant-garde music. And why is that? Well, basically because it hasn't come properly to the mainstream. It has not people haven't been exposed to that that much, at least. We have, in the case of noise, we have Merzbow, who has kind of brought noise to the most mainstream it has ever been, and it's still not a well-known figure. And it has also led to a lot of misconceptions, because we still perceive noise music as a music of the elites. That's something that comes from the first era of experimental music, where basically composers of culture, of proper cultural environment made, and then that lasted maybe until the 60s, when Throwing Gristle decided to appear, because they were performers and decided to bring the avant-garde to the masses instead of keeping it always on the same place, where basically people who already go to avant-garde art galleries and performances is already aware of avant-garde art. And that was their idea, to bring it to the people, make the people understand their message. In their case, that the world is horrible, it's a terrible place. But we've been doing that since the 60s. And if you consider it, we haven't advanced that much. We can't go really that much harder. We can't go really that much more extreme. There are maybe a couple of artists that have made something that I found surprising, or that I not couldn't imagine, but I couldn't imagine working, and they've made it work, and I consider that to be avant-garde in a way, because it progresses forward. However, it has already been done. There's no way that we can actually make something new twice. And most of us can't make something new anyway. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a musician, and a musician with experimental tendencies. I like to experiment a lot with my music, and I like the sound of noise. I listen to quite a bit of noise music and industrial music. Not that that really makes me better, but speaking from the perspective of someone who listens to that and does that, because I make a lot of noise music still nowadays, and it's a reality that I have come to accept, and most people don't accept. They think that they are being forward thinking, and well, that is proportionally correct in terms of, if you look at the whole population and take that subsection of people, in a way they are forward thinking, in another not, and it's their obsession with having purely analog apparatus, and sometimes going to the older stuff. And if you pick up an older synth and an older module and make the exact same thing that your idols did, you are not going forward, you are staying in the same place. Avant-garde music, as it's called, is still in the 20th century, and a lot of people refuse to use computers and newer forms of synths and similar. People refuse to do those things, and that's pretty dumb. However, I want to clarify something. Well, noise music can be easy to make, not necessarily. It can be an extenuating process. That doesn't mean that we make a lot of money for doing nothing. Most of us don't make any money. I've made from noise music less than €5. I will tell you that so far. This is a message to all the people that think that noise music is a way for talentless people to make cash grabs for people who think that are better than anyone. We don't have an audience. We don't have that big backing that you think that we have. It's not a music for the masses. It has never been. It goes up and down, but it always stays below the radar. And a limited amount of people can live from that. Really limited one. Some people have managed to be extremely influential and well known inside the community of experimental music and alternative music, and that's asking a lot for most of us. Noise music is hard for one reason. It's hard to get into. Once you get into noise music, maybe it can be easy to make, maybe not. Especially if you want to renew yourself and you don't want to make the exact same track every time, because I could do that. I could make one track and then repeat the process, and it would all sound kind of the same, and that's not the idea, at least for me. So yeah, I got a bit rambly at the end, but I think that it's important that I say those things. I'm sorry that my English isn't the best, and Right now I have a hard time pronunciating because I'm piercing my mouth. I have a couple of, I have an uncured one and a cured one, and it's been hard to pronunciate anything at all. It hurts to smile. Well, yeah. Bye.